Everything you picture when you hear the word peasant is probably wrong. You imagine mud, misery, and an early grave. Some of that is true, but the real life of a medieval peasant is stranger and in places more comfortable than the story you were told in school. So here is what it was actually like. 7 things they never mention. You slept under the same roof as your cattle. You drank beer for breakfast, and nobody thought it was strange. You were forbidden by law from grinding your own bread. You paid a fee to get married, and another one the day you died. And that famous fact that everyone died around 30? It falls apart the moment you look at the records. Stay for number 6, because it is the one your history teacher almost certainly got backwards. This is Chronica. Let's begin. Start with the home. For a poor family in medieval England, the house was usually a single room. No hallway, no upstairs, no privacy. The floor was bare earth, packed hard by generations of feet. And in many regions, you did not live alone. The typical building was what historians call a long house. Your family lived at one end, and your animals, the cattle, maybe a pig, lived at the other, under the very same roof, separated by little more than a low partition. In winter, the body heat of those animals helped keep the family warm. There was usually no chimney. Smoke from the central fire just drifted up and seeped out through a hole in the roof or through the thatch itself, which meant the inside of your home was dark, sooty, and smelled of livestock and wood smoke every single day of your life. So what was on the table? Mostly 2 things: bread and pottage. The bread was dark and heavy, made from rye or barley, and a working man ate somewhere between 1 and 2 pounds of it a day. Pottage was a thick stew of whatever vegetables and grain the family had: onions, cabbage, peas, beans, simmering in a pot that almost never went cold. Some families kept that same pot going for days, adding to it as they went, so the taste at the bottom was older than the bread on the table. Meat was a luxury the poorest rarely saw. But here's the detail that surprises people most. The everyday drink was not water, it was ale, and a peasant might get through around a gallon of it a day. Before you picture a whole village stumbling drunk, understand that this ale was weak, maybe 1% alcohol, cloudy, unfiltered, closer to a thin liquid bread than to a modern beer. Even children drank the weakest version. Water could carry disease. Ale, brewed and lightly fermented, was often the safer choice. Now, who did all that work belong to? If you were a villain, an unfree peasant tied to the land, a large part of your week was not yours. You owed your lord what was called week work, unpaid labor on his fields, often 2 or 3 days every week, sometimes more. And you did this on top of tending your own strip of land, the land that actually fed your family. Then came the harvest, and with it boon work, extra days demanded at the busiest time of year, when the Lord expected the whole household, wife and children included, out in his fields. Sometimes he softened it with a meal and some ale. Often he did not. Your labor was not simply yours to sell. A share of it was owed, by custom and by law, before you fed a single mouth at home. And it got stranger. You could grow your own grain, but you were forbidden from grinding it yourself. Under a custom called milling soak, every peasant on the estate had to bring their grain to the lord's mill, and the miller took a cut, sometimes as much as 1/10, for the privilege. Owning a small hand mill at home, a quern, was against the law. Get caught with one and you were fined, and the stone was confiscated or smashed. The lord's oven worked the same way. You often could not even bake your own loaf freely. How much did people hate this? During the Great Peasants' Revolt of 1381, rebels broke into St. Albans Abbey specifically to destroy the millstones the monks had seized from them and set into the floor. They risked everything to smash the very stones that ground their bread. Then there were the payments, and there were a lot of them. To the church, you owed the tithe, 1/10 of everything you produced, your grain, your animals, handed over every year, with damnation promised to anyone who refused. To your lord, you owed a whole menu of fines. There was merchant, a fee for permission to marry, charged especially when a woman married a man from another manor. There was chevage, a yearly head tax if you lived away from the estate. And when you finally died, your family owed Harriet, a death duty that usually took your single best animal, your finest ox or cow, and handed it straight to the lord. Think about that. At the exact moment a family lost the person who fed them, the manor arrived to claim the most valuable thing he had ever owned. A widow could be left barely able to survive. You were charged for living, charged for marrying, charged for dying, and expected to be grateful for the protection it supposedly bought.
Now, number 6. The claim that gets repeated online constantly. You have probably seen it. That medieval peasants only worked around 150 days a year. That they had more leisure than we do, all thanks to endless church holidays. It is a comforting story. It is also not quite true. Here is the honest version. There genuinely were a lot of days off. No work on Sundays, saints' days scattered through every month, averaging roughly one a week. A stretch of rest around Easter and Pentecost, and the famous 12 days of Christmas. So the calendar really was full of holy days. But most economic historians push back hard on the idea that this added up to a life of leisure.
How many days a peasant actually worked depended less on the church and more on how much work there was and how much the family needed to eat. The truth sits in between. More holidays than you would guess, but not the endless vacation the meme promises.
Which brings us to the last one, and the biggest misunderstanding of all. You have heard that people in the Middle Ages died around 30, and the raw numbers seems to agree. From the records we have in medieval England, life expectancy at birth for boys in landholding families was only about 31 years. But that figure hides a trick. It does not mean a healthy adult dropped dead at 30. It means so many children died so young that they dragged the average down. More than a third of all babies never reached the age of 5. Those first years were a slaughter. But if you survived childhood, everything changed. Records from the manor of Halesowen show well-off peasants often living to around 50, and reaching 60 or beyond was entirely possible.
The white-haired village elder was real. He was just rarer than he is today. So the next time someone tells you medieval people were ancient at 35, you will know better. 30 was not old. 30 was just the average of a life and a death that began far too early for far too many. That was 7 pieces of a life we usually flatten into a single word, peasant. And every one of them could be a full video on its own. So tell me in the comments, which should Chronica dig into next? The mill and the men who smashed the stones? The real numbers behind the Black Death? Whatever gets the most votes becomes the next deep dive. Subscribe, because history is not the clean story you were sold. It is the invoice, and we read it line by line. This was Chronica.